All right, we're rolling. Thanks a lot, Keynon, for joining. Um, will you tell folks a little bit about what you do?
Well, first of all, Stephen, thanks for having me on your show, man. I greatly appreciate the invite. Um, you
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
um, Thank you for the opportunity to be able to talk more about what I do. So, yeah, a little bit about what I do. First of all, I am a native of Asheville, North Carolina. I'm born and raised here. I was able to be blessed to. I come from a two-parent home. My mom and dad were um, lower middle class family, and my mom and my dad both worked. My dad is a former Harlem Globetrotter, played with the original Globetrotters, Curly Neal and Meadowlark Lemon and all those guys, and spent 30 years of his life working at the Juvenile Evaluation Center as a social worker and a cottage parent there. My mom also the same. She worked for 15 years for the Juvenile Evaluation Center. So growing up, I had those parents, that you throw a rock in any direction. Everybody knew Benny Lake. Everybody knew my mom, and so it wasn't much that I could get away with. Um, After graduating from high school, I went on and went to college and was on a basketball scholarship and played basketball. And after graduating from North Carolina Central University with a degree in sports medicine, I spent a little time trying to live that basketball life. So I played a little pro basketball and tried out for NBA teams and did that whole nine. And started working at Mountain Neurological for about a year. And into that, I realized that, this was dealing with sports medicine. I realized that that wasn't the job that I liked. And so, going back and forth overseas, I needed another job. And so I started working for Buncombe County Department of Social Services at the time, Health and Human Services now, doing family and children Medicaid. I did that for about a year and a half, almost 2 years, and they needed more male social workers. And so, you know, it's funny how God works. I started doing social work just because it was a $12,000 increase in what I was currently making. But it turned out to be the most rewarding and most difficult job that I've ever had in my life. So I did child protective services for almost 10 years, right at 10 years. For the last 5 years or more now, I've been doing community engagement social work. And so I've been with the county for almost 17 years doing being a social worker. I also wrote a book called My Daddy Taught Me That. And I started a nonprofit working with young men also called My Daddy Taught Me That. So, I think it's safe to say my life's work has been working with youth and engaging underserved communities and being an activist and just really trying to, if you want to say if there's such thing as leveling the playing field, you could say that. But I look at it as more so, being that voice and being that beacon for families who are not only underserved, but those who are being, dealing with unjust situations. So that's
Yeah,
the long version of a little bit about me and what I do.
yeah, right on. So, so I got to visit and hang out one time when you were working with your boys, and it's impressive. You carry a lot, carry a lot. Um, there must have been what 30 kids there that the day I was there, or something around
Something
there.
like that. We average so yeah, my daddy taught me that daddy taught me that program. We just started a junior program last Friday. Um, we have about 85 kids enrolled in our program. We just celebrated our 7th year anniversary July 1st. So my daddy taught me that has been up and running for 7 years. We started off with about 8 kids, and 7 years later, we have 84 kids enrolled in the program. Also, we have another program called My Sister Taught Me That, working with the young women. There's 80 something young women in that enrolled in that program. And then, like I just stated earlier, we started My Daddy Taught Me That junior program, working with young men ages 7 through 11. So the regular program deals with ages 12 through 19, grades 6 through 12. We just started the younger version of that this past Friday, July the 5th. And so, between all three of those programs, we have right close to 180, 190 kids in those programs. And so it's been a blessing, learning. And like you said, you were there a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, we usually average between, I would say, 25 to 40 kids. just depending on what season it is, if it's, what sport of the season, if, a lot of our kids are employed and they work. Um, Usually on average, we average, like I said, between 25 and 40 kids. Every now and again, I'll walk in our weekly program and there might be 50 kids in there. It's like, God, we got a lot of kids in here. But
I
it's a
like it.
blessing. It's a true blessing.
Yeah. Talk to me about who these kids are and what it is they need and what it is you're helping them with. What are you providing for these kids?
Excuse me. So, to give a little background about the book and about, how we got here and even with the program. So again, my job and my life's work has been social work and working with youth, underserved and underprivileged kids, under-resourced youth and young adults. I found out, when I started doing this program and started working, this has been like, people always ask me where you get the name from, and I'm kind of, talking around in circles. I'll get to exactly what you asked me here in just a second. When
That's
I
fine.
first started
Great.
this program, people ask me like, where did you get the name from? My daddy taught me that. How did this even come about? And so, like I stated earlier, I had an amazing dad. He was truly amazing. He was my best friend. He passed away when I was 33 years old. Which was 9 years ago. God, time flies. But when I first started this, the book was supposed to be basically a newspaper article to talk about not only what my dad meant to me and to my family, but to this community, what he did as a activist, the people that he helped, the people that he worked with. And so, excuse me for 1 second. And so, the book was a tome to him. But not only that, when I was doing my research as a social worker, I live in West North Carolina. So, the majority, the when you're talking about race, you know, African Americans only make up 7-8% of the population. And so when you talk about absent parent homes, one of the older statistics is 13.7 million single families live in this country. 84% are headed by single moms. So what that tells us, if we have 10 kids living in a single parent home, 8.5 of those kids are being raised by single moms with no positive male influences in their lives. When you also start to look at these numbers and statistics in the research, it'll also have you to believe that it's a black thing. That that black men are the ones that not around taking care of their kids, or black men are the ones that are leaving households and having women raise the children in a lot of absent parent homes. Well, that's not the case. When you particularly when you live in a place such as Asheville, North Carolina, where again the majority is the majority. I'm a social worker. I travel all over the county, and what I saw was that it wasn't the way that the statistics have you believe. It didn't matter where I was. It didn't matter if I was in the middle of the hood, if I was in the middle of a trailer park, or whatever you want to call it. People were people. And so the statistic will show that this was true for everybody. It wasn't a black problem, wasn't a white problem, it was a human problem. And men in general weren't in the households. And so it really just bothered me, Stephen, to be quite honest. It was like, coming from the father that I had, coming from the background that I had, why weren't we as men stepping up to take care of our children and putting so much more of a burden on our women and on our wives? And so the book was to educate and inform men about exactly what I'm talking about. What happens when you're not in the home? What happens when our children are not being, having access to positive males? And so I felt that was my way to put something out to the public to really try to help and inform. One of my good college friends, he was like, your book is good. You have some really good statistics and information. What else are you going to do? So I said, well, I can actually start a men's program and start working with men. And I said, well, no, I love youth though. And I said, you know what? The pipeline of prison is real. These young folks are really having difficulties doing things. I've been working with kids my whole life. Why not start a program to really talk to these young men, not only to address, absent single parent and absent parents and to prepare these young men so when they do become of age and they do get wives and they do get married and they do find women that they have children with, they can not only be, not only active males in their homes, but take that a step further and be active men in their communities and in their neighborhoods and in their cities. Also, to really catch these kids before they make those life mistakes. We know that, again, the pipeline to prison is real. We know that, the penal system is making billions of dollars each year off of our young men. So and we also know that, whether you want to admit it or not, whether people want to acknowledge it or not, if you're a black and brown person, there are obstacles, particularly black and brown men. There are obstacles. There are hurdles. There are pitfalls. There are systematic structures that are put in place that hinder. And so what my program talks about is this. So let me make this clear too, because a lot of people only think that my daddy taught me that it's for African American men. When we first started this program off, we actually had 5 Caucasian young men, and we had 4 African American young men. One of our Caucasian young men moved the first week, so it took us down to 8. So when I first started my program, it was 50% Caucasian, 50% white, if you want to call it that, 50% black or African American. And so as the years went by, we started getting pigeonholed into only working with young men of color. But we work with any young man who wants to learn, who wants to get better, who wants to be, have resources provided for them, be accountable for their actions, help with academics, job training, you name it. We do it, but it's for anybody. But what started happening, Stephen, is, again, we started getting pigeonholed. So, it's just really, people say now that we only work with people of color. That's not the case. But I will say that there is a special need because of the fact that there are many more roadblocks and pitfalls when you're talking about men of color.
Yeah, I hear that. It's I mean, to be honest, the kids these days got it tough. Some got it tougher than others, for sure. But there's I was raised in a house without a dad, but that no fault of his own. He was a quadriplegic. He had Lou Gehrig's disease, and so he wasn't around. And then he finally died when I was 15. But there was no man in my house. And that was something I dealt with, a lot. It was part of what shaped me for sure. And then raising kids, I got 3 kids by blood and a couple step kids, and I mean, even with 2 parents in the home, it's ridiculous how hard it is. Right. But exactly. With only 1 parent in the home, especially a parent who's overworked and exhausted, I mean, it's, and without a functional community, I mean, theoretically, those kids would have, aunts, uncles, cousins, whatever, elder friends, people that cared about them in the community to pull up some of the slack. But most right. Kids don't got that at all, and what you provide, it's impressive to me, it really is.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And to piggyback off what you said too, the traditional family is not so much a traditional family anymore. You used to, in the 60s and 70s, you had the cookie cutter family, the mom and dad, and 2 or 3 kids, and and you're sitting around the dinner table. And so we also know that that's, with the invention of social media and cell phones and all that stuff, not too many families are sitting around the dinner table anymore like that. But then the traditional family is not the same. But what I will say is this, be it an aunt, uncle, be it, grandparents, whoever's raising kids, one of the things that I feel, and this is just my personal belief, but one of the things that I feel is one of the biggest cruxes in our communities and in our country, is the absent of the broken home. When you have broken homes, first of all, you talk about, men being leaders of household and men, taking up the mantle and leading families and stuff like that. Well, if you've never seen that displayed and you never had it displayed, it's going to be hard. Now, let me make this clear. I'm not taking anything from single moms. Single moms, it can be done. You guys have done yeoman's work. I commend, I have a 4-year-old, and when my wife is not around, and it's my turn to do, it's like, man, I wouldn't be able to do this by myself. So, knowing that there are parents out there who do it and do, excuse my language, but do a damn good job, that's not ideal. And when you're looking at, and I mean, this is just, studies show that when you're looking at, kids who come from single homes and some those who come from 2-parent homes, the studies always show that those who come from two-parent homes, and this is not 100% of the time, but the story shows that those kids fare better and do better and are more successful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Um, you must have seen, I mean, you must have seen all kinds of situations, but I imagine, I don't know if it was been worse with the work you're doing now or with the social work, but you must have seen just a lot of horrific situations with these kids and what they're dealing with on daily lives.
Oh man, part of the problems that I face now more so than not is the fact that no one really knows. And so again, I understand that certain things are set up, systems are put in place. I get it. It's a lot of money being made in certain arenas and certain platforms and certain organizations and entities. I understand that. But if there's anything that I would say, and you're right, I've seen a lot of things. There's so many stories that I can talk about, to go on and on. But one of the things that's been really disturbing to me lately over here, particularly where we live in Asheville, is the fact that so for those who don't know, Asheville, North Carolina um is has a very rich resource base of not only revenue, but there's just a lot of resources, a lot of things that can happen in Asheville. Um, for one, if you look at the Forbes last year, the Forbes magazine had Asheville, North Carolina, the number 6 place in the world to visit. Like the entire world. There's a lot of resources, a lot of monetary money and monetary things flowing around Asheville. So for us to be experiencing some of the things that we're experiencing, so for example, we have the 5th worst achievement gap in the country. The fifth
Achievement gap.
Yeah, the 5th worst achievement gap in the country. Um, when you look
What does
at,
that mean?
so the achievement gap is this. So when you talk about the achievement gap, you talk about where our kids are academically compared to each other. So when you look at Caucasian kids, you look at Black kids, um, we have the 5th worst in the nation, meaning that our African American kids are, so like, for example, just to give you an example, in the at Asheville Middle School, if our Caucasian kids took a reading or math test, collectively they would score in the 80 something, between the 80 and 85th percentile. Our African American kids are scoring either in the single digits or like at 10. So that's how
Wow.
big the gap is. The gap is
Wow.
it's not even it's not like it's 20% different or 20 points different or whatever the case may be. It's a huge gap, and this is reading, math. This is, so across the board, our kids are it's just, the gap is just that wide. It's almost, it's to the point where it's made national. We're the 5th worst in the entire country. So and this is right here in Nashville. You look at the unemployment rate. Unemployment says that Asheville, North Carolina is at 2.9%. Well, nationally, that's not bad. I mean, you would think at 2.9% unemployment that everybody's working. They have a lot of people working. Well, when you do, you look deeper into the numbers. 85% of African American males living in Southside, ages 16 through 24, are unemployed. So
What?
85% of African American males living in Southside, ages 16 through 24, are unemployed. You
Wow.
start to look at we're number 2 in the country in gentrification, behind Charleston, South Carolina. It's like, I've never been that guy to think that, well, how should I put this? The white man is out to get me, or they're trying to cause problems for me, or we're living in a racist place. I've never been that guy. I never thought like that. But when you start to look at the numbers and you start to see these things happening, number 2 in gentrification, unemployment rate, the 5th worst achievement gap. We have the highest cost of living and the lowest paying jobs in the state of North Carolina. It starts to make you wonder, like, okay, well, what's the grand scheme? I'm a native of Asheville. This is my home. So we have places and people and communities that have been uprooted and lifted and moved, and so it's just been a lot happening here, and our youth are being directly impacted by it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you told me all that, because honestly, I didn't know that, and um, this is one of those subjects that can be a touchy subject, but so let's jump into it a minute, because I mean, frankly, I'm pretty ignorant about a lot of all this, and some of that is my my skin color, but a lot of it is also just I grew up in a very different place. I grew up in D.C. It was black majority. I was raised by a black woman for almost 10 years, and even it was a black majority city, but we had it was very international, very
Right.
international. So I had people from all over, and the crews that I was in, we were every color of the rainbow, and the crews of people that wanted to kick our ass were every color of the rainbow, and so we did separate ourselves into groups, but race was not a primary factor, at least not in most of DC. There were places where it was, but it was just a very different environment. And then I come down here, and from my understanding is that Asheville has a, let's say, milder history than a lot of the South as far as the real, racial horrors. But you look at, and I could be wrong about that, but you look at, it's still functionally segregated, maybe less than it was, but this is a segregated place.
Actually, I would even argue. Go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, even with the populations that have been moving in from, I mean, I know the Guatemalan population, there's Russian populations, even the other people moving in, it's still these pocket communities, and there's still this weird, segregated, isolated vibe.
So let me just say this. So it's a couple things I could say. So when my friends come, my college friends or my friends come from out of town, majority of them always say, Keynon, where are the black people at? Like, where are the black people at? And so you're right. Like for decades, black people, they're secluded to their areas. You have the side of towns where black people hang out, which are mostly in their comfort zones, which are mostly at their homes. And so when you have communities like a Pisgah View, a Hillcrest, a Diva View, those are places that you're going to find people of color, particularly black people. You're 100% right. I mean, now what I will say is this, though. The history of Asheville has changed dramatically. Like when I was growing up, even though black people stayed in their silos, I think that's always been the case. We still had a really rich community, thriving community of African Americans. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, so the Montfort area now, where you can't buy a house in Montfort right now for less than $400,000. They made it historic. When I was in high school, that entire neighborhood, that entire community was black community, and I'm talking about black owned, like owned houses. They own, they owned all, and it was a lot. I can name 30, 40 families who lived in Montfort. Now I could probably name 5, people of color, families that still live in Montfort, So, the same thing. So this is part of the redlining and the gentrification, but it's also a testament of how, like, for example, to give you the total example I'm talking about, Eagle Market Street. If you go down Eagle Market Street now, you'll see the Foundry Hotel. You'll see some condos that they're building across from the park. The last remnant in the park is a mural painted on the wall in the park, and you got a couple of pictures of prominent people who are in this community. My dad's on the wall, and a couple people on the wall besides that. But it's sad because.
Awesome,
Say it again.
That's cool that your dad's on the wall. That's awesome.
Yeah, he actually has 2 pictures. He has a picture with him as a little boy on the wall, and then he has a picture with him in his Harlem Globetrotter outfit. But the sad part about it is that was the only place in Asheville where black people used to congregate. Barbershops, storefront. It was that's where the area was where the African American population went to do things, and now it's gone. And so you look at Asheville, and it's like, again, what's happening, And so I said this the other day. Do I think that there are people again who just have it in? It's like, we're going to make it just so hard for black people in Asheville, and we're going to do this. It's like, well, I mean, I would be 100% false if I said there are not people out there who think like that. But I just don't think. I think what I think is happening is this. I think Asheville is becoming a product of itself, and so you want to have these. Our housing is we have a huge homelessness problem, but we have some of the highest cost of housing in the state. And actually, I would actually a thing came out. An article came out the other day saying that we've exceeded the national average as far as our rent is concerned. And so you have all these things happening in Asheville, but beneath the veneer, you have, people you have shootings in communities every day. Shootings in the Lee Walker Heights and these communities every day. Police don't respond. Nothing's being reported. Nothing's being done. You have all these huge disparities where Black and brown people are being not only marginalized, but to give you another statistic, another thing that happened last year, the city of Asheville conducted a disparity study when it comes to procurement and jobs. They hired an organization out of Ohio and paid that organization $310,000 to do a year-long study. The study took place they went back from 2012 to 2017 to find out about business procurement and how the city distributed their funding. $118 million was distributed in that 5-year process. $115 million went to white-only businesses. $1.3 million went to Hispanic businesses, and $590,000 went to African American owned businesses. So basically, in the 5-year span, they almost gave the organization who did the disparity study more money in 1 year to do the study than they gave the entire African American community in 5. And so, like 98% of all the funding that they divvied out to these businesses were white-only businesses. And so here's all these disparities that you're having in Asheville. And so it really causes a conflict with the way you start to think about stuff and you start to see how things are happening. I grew up in an era, where we played basketball. I played basketball. My dad played basketball. We have rec centers here. We have Stevens Lee. We have Montfort. We have Shiloh. We used to have the Reed Center, which is now the Wesley Grant Center. But we have, the Eddington Center. We have all of these rec centers now, but they close early on the weekdays. They're not open on Saturday. And so where are our kids going to go? In fact, this would have caused a riot when I was growing up. Like, you're not going to open the gyms? There are no brick and mortar places in Asheville for people of color to pretty much call their home and call their own. In every city you think about it, that's thriving. I don't know if you're aware, this Charlotte, North Carolina, which is 90 minutes away from Asheville, just got dubbed 2 weeks ago the number 6 city in the nation for Black prosperity. So when you start thinking about areas that are doing well, you just talked about you're from Chocolate City, from DC, Charlotte, Greensboro, Raleigh, Durham, Atlanta. You name all these cities that have, Baltimore, all these cities that have thriving African-American communities. And we know that there's a HBCU in those cities, which is a historically Black college or university. There are brick and mortar places for people to go, people of color to go. But when you don't have any brick and mortar places, you don't own anything, you have no access to do, X, Y, and Z, it causes a real problem and a real conflict, So again, Asheville's my home. I love Asheville, but it's like beneath the veneer, there's a lot happening and a lot going on that a lot of people are not aware of. And quite frankly, it's just not fair.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned even just, about the rec centers not being open on Saturdays and things. I mean, this is, this might be a trite question to put you on the spot with, but I mean, what are some things that would make life better, in particular for,
Well, I mean, one thing that would make things better is really, particularly when you're talking about our youth, but, I think this will be better for the community. One of the problems that Mission was having was retaining people of color. Mission did a real big campaign about 3 or 4 years ago where they really sought after bringing more doctors of color, more professional medical people of color. But what started happening is when they got here, they were like, okay, well, I got this great job, but there's nobody who looks like me doing, doing what I'm doing. And so it was hard to keep people here. They give them these great jobs. They have these great jobs. Well, they don't give it. They earn, and they hire people to get these great jobs, but then there's nothing for them to do, nowhere for them to go, no social life. So one of the things that I think more so than not is that it has to start with something brick and mortar. You have to have a place for our youth to congregate. I said this at one of our conferences we had the other day. An idle man will tempt the devil to tempt him. So it's like when you have too much time in your hands and you have nothing to do, you will find anything, whether it's getting in trouble or not. But we know our kids, these kids are just going to be like, look, we can do this, we can do that. This might be a little fun. It's going to, and so finding a brick and mortar space, a brick and mortar building to where you can build a community around. So like the building can be an avenue and outlet for our youth. It could be, business. You can have business space, and so you have office space for businesses of people of color. You have, you have this, you have that. So you have a hair salon, you have a barber shop, you have so many different things that draw people to this space. Where once you start to do it, you can make a community out of it. I know. So if I'm coming to Asheville and it's like, okay, where do I go to get hair products? Where do I go to get this at? Oh, you can go here and get that. They have some of that there. If there's nothing and nowhere for you to go, it's like, well, where do I go? It's like, well, you might can look up and find somebody somewhere, and they might can show you what to do. But you got to have a brick and mortar place. That's the first thing. That's for me. That would be the first thing that I would say something brick and mortar for particularly for our youth and our kids to go and things to do.
Internet's breaking up for a second. I'm just going to pause. All right, we good?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I'm good. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're good. We're good. Let's keep going.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's something that I noticed just in general about Asheville, that there's nowhere for kids to go. Period. I mean, that may be more true for African American kids, but there's just not. I mean, unless you can spend money, there's nowhere for the teenagers to be.
Right.
Nothing. That's just growing up here. That's the problem.
The other thing that I would say too, piggybacking on what you said. Go ahead. I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you were talking. And
can you hear me?
Fuzzy. I can hear you now. Yeah.
No. Go ahead. I can hear you too. Go ahead. I can hear you. Go ahead. You were saying there was nothing for the youth, teenagers. Period.
Yeah, and like I said, that may be more true for African American kids, but it's just true in Asheville compared to any place I've lived.
Right.
There's nothing for the kids to do that doesn't cost money.
Right. The other thing that I was going to say was that when it comes to helping out the community, the thing that has to be done, you have to find a way to increase employment, but then so there's a big discussion going on around the country now about reparations and all that kind of stuff. And if you believe in reparations, I don't want to get into that. That's a whole nother can of worms. But there has to be a way to leverage the playing field a little bit. Now, I'm not saying you give out handouts or you just line everybody up who's a person of color and be like, we're going to give you a check. Be great. But with that being said, you have to find a way to pour money into underserved communities. And that's where it's like, look, the only way that these communities are really the only way that any community that when you have underserved, resourced, underprivileged, if you want to call it, whatever the name you want to call it, is going to ever really benefit is finding a way to distribute the money. You have, like I just told you, how the city gave 115 million out of 118 million to white-only businesses. Well, you have to find a way to pour into underserved, under-resourced communities to kind of leverage that out a little bit. and what that can, and that there's a number of ways that you can do that. You can pour into nonprofits directly impacting those communities. You can find businesses or business owners who are directly impacting and directly impacting communities. But be creative and find some type of way to distribute the monetary resources, because we both know, we can talk about X, Y, and Z all day. When it comes down to it, it's about the dollar. It's about money. It's about how you're going to get it done. And the only way you get stuff done is when you have finances and money to either back you, fund you, or support you.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. And it's I wish I knew more about the local, the local economy and issues. I think it's interesting, looking at Charlotte as a counterpoint to Asheville,
Right.
Because like you said, I've gone down to Charlotte. I hadn't ever really hung out in Charlotte much. My perception had used to be that was a more racist place. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but then the last couple of years I've been going down there, and most of the black people I interact with are driving better cars than me down there, for sure. And I know that's only a section of folks, but yeah, economically, the black community there is doing way better than Asheville. And I again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine 50 years ago that would have been the reverse. Maybe Charlotte.
Yeah, I think Charlotte has always. So again, when you start looking at these areas, so there's several things about. So first of all, you have an HBCU in Charlotte, which is a historically black college university. Then you got UNC Charlotte. You got a couple of major colleges there, but just quite naturally, you have a larger population of African American people. The other thing that people don't understand too, people talk about, Charlotte and Atlanta and DC, and, so if I'm not mistaken, and the numbers have changed on this, they change yearly. So we're one of the few places in the country that have a dwindling African American population, Asheville, North Carolina. Every year, the number gets smaller and smaller because people are either being boxed out or moved out. So what's been happening over the last 5 to 6 years is that while the numbers in the city are getting smaller, the numbers in the county, meaning African Americans, are getting smaller in the city, the numbers in the county are getting higher because people are moving out of the city to the county. But then when you look overall, population of African Americans is getting smaller and smaller by the year because, again, people of color are not able to afford to stay here. So they leave and they go to a Charlotte, they go to an Atlanta, they go to places where they can afford to stay. So there's a couple things that you got to keep in mind. One, so let me back up. I think last year it was like 5.7% of the population in the city of Asheville are African American. The year before that was like 7.9%. And so again, you look at 7.9%, I think if you're talking about 2017, 5.7% in 2018, the number at that time was 5.8% was the population of African Americans living in the city. 2.9% were on the poverty line. So you got almost 1 out of every 2 persons of color living in poverty. Again, 5.7, 2.9, it's almost, like I said, 1 out of every 2 living in poverty. So when you have that, it's very, very hard to get a hold and to get to get leverage as a population of people. Now, when you're in Atlanta, you're in Charlotte. So if you're talking about 2.9 on living in poverty, let's just look at it this way. You have a lot larger population of people in Charlotte, a lot larger population of people of color living in Atlanta. But then you have people of color who make more money, who have means, who have so much more, like you just said. So then on top of that, you have HBCUs. So those communities are going to thrive. Those communities are gonna pull together and have resources to do certain things and be able to. We talked about this 2 years ago. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, there was a restaurant downtown Asheville that really didn't want black people to be there. Well,
Hmm.
to be quite honest, it really wouldn't matter because they're not spending any money. They're not gonna be impacted one way or another. Like, so if a
Right.
black person didn't walk into your restaurant, it's not going to impact you anyway because you're not. It's not like you're losing money if they don't show up. The reverse of that, last summer there was a situation with the restaurant, and Ti, the rapper slash actor, he formed a boycott, and they boycotted the restaurant. The restaurant put out a apology and because the restaurant started to lose a lot of money because of the population of African American people who supported the restaurant. And so, we talked about this. Like, say, for example, again, there was a restaurant or a business or something in Nashville that really did not want to cater to us as a people. Well, this doesn't really matter because they're not going to lose money. They don't have to change their views. They don't have to change. They don't have to make things nice for people of color. They don't have to address your needs because if you're talking about how things run in this world and we know things run off money, it's like, why should we cater to anything that they need or anything that they want rather than us just being good human beings and good citizens? But we know that when it comes to that dollar, it's like, please, they're not spending money in this building. They're not breaking the bank with money. So I'm going to cater to the population of people that I serve. And so
Hmm.
we know that to be true here in Asheville. So there are a lot of things that can change in Asheville to make Asheville better. I think we have to get out of, I think for one, Asheville has become very greedy as far as um, the dollar. I think everything that we do, we're the beer capital of this. We have all these festivals where, it's nothing but promoting beer and raising more money. Then you talk about our housing economy. People, talk about, like, I mean, it's insane. You spend, $200,000 for a house here, and it's something the size of a shack. It's just crazy. Whereas
Yeah.
you go, an hour and a half, 2 hours away, you can get a very nice home for the same price. Asheville has become, to me, so dependent on the dollar and raising prices, and it's always been a tourist town, I know, but it's just different. Being a native of here and seeing how things have changed and seeing how it's not about the people anymore. It's not. We building hotels left and right, and we have a huge homelessness problem. What about the people who stay in here? You shouldn't have to work 3 jobs just to survive in Asheville, North Carolina. And so it's
Yeah. I agree with you 100% with everything you just said. And again, I've only been here 20 years, and I've watched a lot of bad decisions on top of bad decisions that, frankly, are designed for the money and for the tourist dollars, and not for the people who live here. Most of the people
right,
was friends here have moved away because they can't afford to live here, because there's a huge gap. I mean, even if you have a job, there's a huge gap between the average
hmm
wage and the cost of living, and the cost of living
right,
keeps rising, and the does not. And then yeah, the whole Beer City USA. I mean, I love beer. Don't get me wrong. I think that was one of the dumbest things they could have ever done. We used to have the tourist population, which we've always catered to more than I think is wise. But the tourists used to come here because of the beauty of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and for the
right,
art and music
hmm
and for the culture. And now they come here to get pissed drunk and wander around
right,
downtown and harass people.
right,
Um, and on the other hand, um, the breweries offer some of the best jobs you can just go and get. At least with the people I know, it's like, you were talking about Mission. Um, Doctors get 80% of what they would get for the same job in Charlotte, and that's standard in Asheville. They get 80% in Asheville of what they would have gotten if they were in Charlotte. That's what insurance reimburses, because even someone who doctors obviously are making pretty decent money, but comparatively, but still they're getting less because that's the standard of living cut. They know
right.
people will accept less because they'd rather live here than live in Charlotte. And so the city itself has just all these economic problems, a lot of which it's done to itself. And now
Right.
we're a victim of our success. We've got traffic jams because we told everyone to live here
That's
and we didn't build an
that's another thing.
infrastructure.
We don't have the infrastructure. So like you said, over the last 3 to 4 years now, you used to be in Asheville, you can get anywhere in Asheville in 10 to 15 minutes. It
Yeah.
didn't matter. It didn't matter. It didn't matter what side of town you was on. 15 minutes, you zip right through. Now,
Easy.
particularly during the time of day, you're lucky. You're lucky if you get somewhere in 30, 40 minutes. That's just depending on the time of day. It's like we don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the roads. We don't have, it's a lot we don't have. But again, like you said, you don't put the light on saying, move to Asheville, and people are really taking you up on it. It's like we're moving, we're coming, and it's like, wait a minute, But the problem is, it doesn't seem like the city or the how could I put it, the economy, the system is it's not prepared to handle the influx, but it's not prepared to slow down either. It's like, no, this is great. Look, in 2008, when the entire country was suffering and going through, a depression, the housing economy was booming, and actually I've talked to several of my friends who are in real estate, and it's like, okay, this is 2014. When is the bubble? This 2016 is so it's like they were predicting that the bottom has to fall out sometime, but then it's like, when? It hasn't happened yet, and and according to, again, my friends in real estate, it's like, yeah, we're waiting for it to happen. It just doesn't seem like it's ever going to happen. So
Yeah.
it's just getting ridiculous when I mean, this is the thing. I was going to sell. I got married last year. I was going to sell my home, and I kept it to rent it out, and so I literally was on the brink of selling it, and several of my friends were like, "No, don't sell it. This is it's an asset. Keep it." So I was like, "Okay, I'll keep it." I looked at a realtor to rent my house out, and I have my house is a 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath, 1,600 square feet ranch style home. They were telling me to put it on the market for $2,100 a month for rent, and I'm like, "There's no freaking way! Like that's highway robbery!" Like, and so finally, one of the ladies said, the same house in Arden is selling for this," and she's like, "So," and I'm in the West. You're in West Asheville, so it's like, well, I wouldn't put it on the market less than $1,800. It's like $1,800 a month. Like that's, but this is what we're talking about. I know people, and so of course I didn't do that. In fact, I rented my house out for way lower than that to a family who can really appreciate it and need it. But there are people who have
Right.
trailers, who are renting trailers out for like $1,200 a month, and it's like, this is
Yeah.
it's just insane.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me. Like, but Asheville, North Carolina, this is what $2,100 for rent. Like, that's just not how it's supposed to be. But that's how it is here in Asheville.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I rent, and it's harder and harder. The prices go up and up and up. It's a weird thing. It's a weird thing, and I don't know what. I think there's a lot of solutions, but some of it is having to have will.
Right.
There's a lot of things we could do to make Asheville a better place for the people who live here.
Right.
And in particular for the poorest and underserved. But really for everyone who lives here, because the people that are having a great time, most of them made a lot of money somewhere else and then moved
Right.
here.
And moved here. Right.
And I don't bear them ill will, but it's it's something wrong with the whole situation for sure. But yeah, and shoot, that's the adults and the kids, and then here you are, doing your best to help out. What did you say you had, like 180 kids involved in your program? Just going back to that,
Yeah.
it's like, that's I think the work you do is important and admirable as hell. And then all the other problems we're talking about are still there, It's like trying to help someone out in a situation that's, it's going to be rough no matter,
Well, I greatly appreciate that. I look at it like this. God gave me a platform, and through my father, seeing my dad, learning from him, and it's funny how life, as a youngster, you take for granted and you don't realize it, but it really has been my life journey. So to really help youth, let me just make this clear. So we are an official grassroots nonprofit. The first 2 years of this program, 2.5 years, I literally funded it out of my own pocket, and that's when we were dealing with really small numbers. We only had like 8 to 12 kids, and it was kind of doable to do what we were doing at the time. But over the years, we've had a few donors, we gotten a few grants, but we are still truly a grassroots nonprofit. I've never gotten paid to do what I do with My Daddy Taught Me That. In the 7 years we've been doing it, I do all the work. I mean, I do it because it's a need, and because I know that these young folks don't have much else, you know. So it's not a pat on my back. It's not that I need credit for anything. It's just the fact that what we do need, the ask that I would tell people is this, and I said this the other day. We have a lot of youth. So even if it's not My Daddy Taught Me That or My Sister Taught Me That, which is our girls' version of My Daddy Taught Me That, there are other youth programs, you know, that are doing work in this community. There are other systems that are doing, you know, some work in this community. I would do an action call to people to really get involved, you know, to really, and I get it. We live in our blinders. I have 2 full-time jobs. I'm a social worker for the county, um, community engagement social worker, and I run a full-time nonprofit. I'm a husband. I'm a father. Um, but you know, the sacrifice is real, and people, we have to understand that if you're not willing to sacrifice your time, you know, monetary donations, your skills, your talents, um, the issues are going to continue to compile and get worse. I think it's crazy that we live in a community this is not Chicago, you know, this is not Atlanta, you know, Asheville's small, but where you can have
Right.
shootings in communities, and I go to work the next day and it's like, you know, people hear me on the phone, and it's like, oh my God, there was a shooting? And it's like, yeah, there were several shootings. There actually was a shooting. I didn't hear anything about it. No, nothing. And so it's like we walk around with blinders on, intentionally and unintentionally, you know. And it's like we got to be better to understand and get involved the way you can. Show up the best way you can. I always tell people, stay in your lane. You know, God gave you gifts and talents and skills, but use those gifts and talents and skills to get involved some kind of way to help serve the community in some kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I mean, like I said, I've been raising kids for 20 years. Um, and I've worked with kids at times, and I've known kids and families. You know, I've certainly known plenty of kids being raised by single mothers, and I've known kids who had a hard time at home. But what I had, it's shocking to me how many kids are in that situation. It really is, and I didn't realize how spread it was, because this is not, and just in here in Asheville, because this is, like you said, it's not a big place. This is not, you know, a huge urban center. This is not somewhere I would have expected there to be as many kids kind of falling through the cracks and not getting what they need as there actually are, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I second that. You know, I've been feeling the call. I've been, you know, wrapped up in my own stress and in my own life, and just doing the best to, you know, do my work and take care of
Survive.
my kids, and, you know, you survive. Exactly. And that's not been easy at times. And it's also, I'm looking at it now and being like, well, it's also a poor excuse. You know, there's so many kids, and you know, there's people like yourself that can really kind of hold it down, you know. But then for someone like me, it's like, well, I can still show up and do something, you know. And so I've been feeling the itch to do more of that, and I have been doing a little bit more of that than I have been in a couple of different capacities, and that feels good to me, you know, because it's like, I mean, that's literally our future, is our kids, you know. And they're just,
Anytime, the invitation is always extended. Anytime you want to come back and, you know, hang out with our young men, you're more than welcome. We love to have you. We need it. So, you know, the invitation is always open.
I appreciate that. I'd love to do it again soon. We'll be in touch about that. Um, And I guess on that note, before we wrap it up, do you want to any kind of closing thoughts or words or
So yeah,
contact
I
info? Would
mean,
be good.
totally. First of all, I want to thank you, Stephen, for allowing me to again be on your show and just to express some of the things that we're dealing with, some of the things that we're going to. For the audience who will be listening to this, to know more about My Daddy Taught Me That, My Sister Taught Me That, please follow us on Facebook. There's a My Daddy Taught Me That page on Facebook. You can follow me on my Facebook, which is Keynon Lake. Also, the website is www.mydaddytaughtmethat.org. You can follow us through that. But yeah, please get involved. There's so much that we need. You know, to talk about monetary donations, to talk about, again, you know, skills, talents. We need a grant writer. We need people to really support, help us. This is, other than myself, I have one volunteer. His name is Joe Green. He's been with me for about 5.5 years. But what we've been doing is, raising up our youth. So we've been having a lot of our older youth who've been with the program for 5 years, doing discipleship and mentoring and stuff like that, training those guys up as well, which has been great. But there is so much that we can benefit from and use and need. And so any way, again, that you feel like you can support, plug in, assist, my daddy taught me that, we would love to have it. We need it. Any questions that you have, feel free to give me a call. My number is 828-582-2261. I don't mind answering questions and talking about what we got going on, learning more about what we do. I'm all for it. But again, I want to thank you, Stephen, for allowing me to be on and talk about some of the things that we're doing, not only what my daddy taught me that, but with some of the things that we're trying to address in this community as well.
I appreciate it, Keynon. Definitely. Anytime. All right, my friend. Thanks for being on.
All right, my friend. You take care. We'll be talking soon.
All right. Awesome.
All right, now.